Good morning, everybody. Oh, sorry, my voice. I just needed to clear it a little bit there. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this Sally Goodwin Ministries Facebook Live, Facebook page. And this Sally Goodwin Ministries encompasses the magnificent community that is the Church Without Walls, that we just love and appreciate beyond measure, and Igero Prophetic School. And we met in person last night, and it was absolutely amazing. Well, I thought it was amazing. So maybe some of you wonderful Igero people who were there last night can just attest to whether you found it as amazing as I did. But I just really felt like God moved in the most incredible way. Heroic Hilda, good morning, my lovely. And also Activate Her. And we all meet together in this space and hear what God has to say. Beautiful Bertha, welcome, my lovely. So it is Friday, so it is this week's episode of Friday Feast, and we are going to feast on the word of the Lord this morning, and we are going to learn from the book of Esther. Courageous Conrad, welcome. Good morning, gorgeous Cole, lovely to have you. We're going to learn from the book of Esther this morning because it is Purim today. So the Jewish people are celebrating the Feast of Purim, which is the festival, I'm sorry, my nose is running, is the festival of the salvation of the Jews through Esther and Mordecai. Amazing, Anthea, welcome, my lovely. Tamsin, my darling, good morning. Oh, thank you, gorgeous Cole. I always want to be sure that everybody else who was at Igero felt the same way I did. Significant Sonia, welcome. That, I've just realized I forgot to put my wedding ring on. My goodness. You know how when you're so used to wearing something and you feel a little bit naked without it. I forgot to put it on this morning. Wonderful, Wendy, welcome. Yes, it's, I always, I'm like, Flynn and I drive home and we're like, wow, and God was so present, and, his presence was so tangible, and he was so amazing. And then in the morning I wake up and I think, I hope everybody else also thought that. But God is just amazing what he is doing. What he is doing on the earth. Do not be perturbed by what you hear in the natural. Do not be perturbed. Radiant Renil, we're welcome. By what you read in the news. Be aware, be awake, and be conscious or cognizant of what God is calling you to walk in and what he is asking you to do in this season. Because that is what we need. We do not need to be despondent. We do not need to be unsettled. We do not need to be fearful. We do not need to be any of those things, but we do need to be awake. We need to be awake. So it doesn't mean that we live in some sort of vacuum where we, just ignore the things that are happening, because we were all born for such a time as this. And over the Feast of Purim, when the story of Esther is retold by the Jewish people, we get to learn more from the story of Esther, and we get to stand and say, Lord, raise up the Esthers, raise up the Mordecais, raise up the people. And when we call out names like that, that is not gender specific particularly. What we are calling for is for God to raise up people who will step up and see the deliverance of a nation happen. And obviously we call for that for our nation. We call for that for the nations on the continent of Africa. We call for that for the nations of the world, because only God can do what needs to be done. Gorgeous Estrelita, my lovely. I hope you're feeling better. We missed you last night, my darling. Praying for you. We did pray for you. Radiant Roz, welcome. We prayed for Estrelita. We prayed for Jolene. We prayed for Chantal. All the people who were sick last night and couldn't come to prophetic school. We prayed for you. And sorry, don't get seasick. I'm just adjusting this a little bit. Significant, Sylvia, welcome. So yes, let us be awake, let us be aware, let us be cognizant and conscious of what God is calling us to. Let us know. Good morning, Siseko, welcome. Lovely to have you online. So good to see you here. And just again, I just want to say good morning to everybody who has joined on the lives this morning. Hanneli, my gorgeous, welcome. Everybody who's joined on the lives this morning. And somehow or other, I don't know whether it's the internet or whether it's Facebook, but what often happens is the names come up and they're either the same comment repeats over and over, or I don't see all the comments, and only afterwards when I go back and look at all your comments after I've uploaded the live to YouTube and to Instagram, do I see some of your comments. So please do not be offended if you say good morning and I do not greet you. There is a chance that I just didn't actually get to see your comment because they don't all seem to come up on the screen. And sometimes if I'm also in kind of full flow, then I don't see it, it goes up. And sometimes they go up so quickly because a whole lot of people are commenting that I don't get to see them all. So no offense necessary. I love you all. I bless you all. I'm so grateful to all of you who watch, whether you watch the live, whether you watch the replay. I get people who message me and they say to me, I'm so sorry that I couldn't watch the live, or I'm so sorry because I'm getting my children ready for school. I'm so sorry because I'm on my way to work or whatever. And I'm like, no, that is not a problem. Magnificent Magda, welcome. It's not, there's no kind of, I don't have a register that I tick off in the morning. It is just to know that you do watch at some point in time and you do hear what God is saying to you. So yes, magnificent Melanie, let God arise and his enemies be scattered. So on Wednesday, we spoke about Vashti. We learned a bit more about Queen Vashti, knowledge that apparently, according to the feedback I received, most of you did not know and were quite blown away by, and which is absolutely right, because that's just stuff we're not taught. So this morning we're going to learn a little bit more about Esther and the story of Esther. And on Monday, on Monday, we learned about the meanings in Esther's name, in her Jewish name, Hadassah, and in her the name that she was given, Esther, and how her destiny was hidden in her name, and how absolutely incredible that was. Special Sylvia, welcome. But before we get on, can I just take a moment to can I show you? Can you see my nails? I don't know if you can see them. Can you see my nails? Do you see? Firstly, I'm showing you one nail because it's just easier. Otherwise, I don't know whether you'll be able to see all of them. But do you see the little beautiful flowers there on the side? And are they not absolutely gorgeous? Can you see? Are they not gorgeous? Are they not gorgeous? Hey? Beauty by T, people. Beauty by T, my gorgeous Tamsin. I just send her a picture and she makes it happen. And actually she makes it happen better than the picture. Can I just say that? So isn't this a beautiful color? But isn't that just, I mean, look at that. Can you see? She paints that herself. Is that not gorgeous? She paints that on my nail. That's not a sticker. Hey? Oh, talented, my word. Beauty by T. And she doesn't only do nails. She does all sorts of other things that I'm going to hopefully one day be able to avail myself of. Oh, like a facial, because my almost 56-year-old face definitely needs help. So there we go. Beauty by T. She is lovely. Oh, I'm rhyming this morning. Okay, we got home quite late last night, and then when we get home from prophetic school, my spirit is all stirred up and I'm all kind of, so we went to bed quite late. So if I'm a little bit tired, but it's good tired. Right, okay, so where did we get to? We spoke about Esther, and here she is. Oh, you see, Melanie saw them even from far off. Thank you, my lovely. And Esther finds favor. Morning, Stu, welcome. Esther finds favor with everyone when she goes into the palace, into the harem, into King Xerxes' harem. She finds favor with everyone. And it is just amazing, actually, because you can already see God's hand on her life. And so what we learned last night at prophetic school, we learned about hearing the voice of God. Elisma, welcome, darling. Good to see you. We learned about hearing the voice of God and how we hear the voice of God and all that sort of thing. And I just was thinking this morning when I woke up, and I was just kind of meditating over what God wanted me to say this morning. I was thinking how, we don't hear God directly mentioned in the book of Esther. He isn't directly mentioned in the book of Esther, but because we know him and because we know how, what God is like. Lovely Lucinda, welcome. Joyful Jolene, we prayed for you last night, my lovely. I hope you're feeling better. Because we know God, we know who he is and how he works. We know that he was moving and he was setting the stage and he was ensuring that the things were in place for the deliverance of the Jewish people. And I was thinking this morning that it's so similar for us in our lives. Often we say things like, I can't hear God, or I don't hear God, or I don't feel like God is moving, or I don't feel like God is, often we say things like that. We think things like that. But the thing is, that God is moving. He is moving. He is shifting things. He is doing the things. We just don't always realize it because he's doing it in such a natural way. None of the Jewish people, when the whole thing happened with Vashti, and the Jewish people lived, Julie, my lovely, welcome. The Jewish people lived fairly comfortably in Persia. They weren't persecuted. They lived a fairly comfortable life in Persia. They did their thing. They followed, the laws of the king, but they lived as Jews. They followed their own laws still, and the laws God had given them, and the eating and the praying and all of that. But they actually lived quite comfortably. It wasn't like they were constantly persecuted or harassed or, so it's not like they were living terrible lives in Persia. Teshka, lovely, welcome. So they didn't even, they didn't see what was coming with Haman. They didn't see what was coming at all. But God was moving already. And I think sometimes it's like that with us. We're sort of going along with life, and then something happens and we're all like, oh my word, this is so terrible. I can't hear the Lord. I don't know what God is doing. I can't see. But God is previous. People say God is an 11th hour God. I would disagree. I disagree with that. God is not an 11th hour God, because God is coming through, has been setting things in place for your deliverance, for your salvation, for your assistance, to come through for you. He's already been putting things in place before you even needed to pray the prayer. He's already been putting things in place. And then these things unfold, and they unfold sort of fairly naturally in terms of events, and their moments of panic and moments of anxiety, and then God comes through. But we don't, because he doesn't, like I said to them last night, because he doesn't, there isn't a burning bush, there isn't a writing in blood on the wall kind of thing. We all like, oh no, but I didn't hear the Lord. But no, you actually did. It's just that when he moves like that, just in natural circumstances, we don't realize that he's moving. And Esther is the book of Esther is such a good example of that, because the closest you come to hearing about them even consulting the Lord is that God is when Esther undertakes the 3-day Esther fast. Obviously she's fasting unto the Lord. She's fasting for salvation. She's fasting for deliverance. She calls all the Jewish people to fast with her for all of those things. But that's the closest you get to the way that they interact with the Lord in the book of Esther. And yet God was moving, and he already knew that this was coming. and he had already put a plan in place for his people. And so it is the same for us. Whatever nation we live in, whatever space we live in, whatever people group we live amongst, whatever comes at us, God is not taken by surprise. He's not, oh my goodness, I wasn't expecting this. Oh dear, okay, how are we going to do this now? No, he's not taken by surprise. He's like, yes, I knew this was coming. I have already been putting plans in place for you, for your deliverance, for your salvation, to see you through this time. And all I need from you is that you walk in obedience, and you step up when I call you to step up, and you wake up when I tell you to wake up, and you arise when I tell you to arise, and you be activated when I tell you to be activated. That is all I need from you. Pay attention, people. I've already moved on from this space. I'm already planning the next move. Pay attention. So those are all the things that I get from the book of Esther. It's just incredible. It really, really is. And so what happens if you go to Esther chapter 2, verse 15, Esther chapter 2, verse 15, it tells you that Esther, who Mordecai had adopted as his own daughter, when the turn came for Esther to appear before the king, she didn't ask for anything other than what Haggai, the king's officer in charge of the harem, advised. So there was a God-given wisdom that Esther was walking in because of what God had called her to. And often I feel as though God calls us to things, and then we immediately panic because we think, oh my goodness, I don't know how I'm actually going to, do this. But if God calls you to something, he's going to give you the wisdom and the revelation that you need to step into that. And that's another way that we hear God, that we underestimate, where sometimes we have to make a decision, or we have to make a choice, or we step into a situation that we don't quite know what to deal with, and suddenly this wisdom comes from somewhere, and we think, oh wow, that's amazing, I didn't even know I knew that. No, you probably didn't know that, but it is a God-given wisdom. And it's the same God-given wisdom that Esther walked in, whether she knew it or not, that told her to, the people to ask for the way to appear before the king. And she's brought to King Xerxes in his royal palace in the 10th month of Tevet. We've all learned about Tevet. If you've been on this platform for any length of time, we've heard all about the month of Tevet. During the 7th year of his reign. I don't know if numbers mean anything to you, but she comes to King Xerxes in the 10th month, which is Tevet, during the 7th year of his reign. God is bringing something full circle, right? And it says here that the king loved Esther more than all the women. She won grace and favor in his sight, and he sets the royal crown on her head, and he makes her queen instead of Vashti, and he gives a great banquet, another great banquet, and all of this kind of thing. And Esther still hasn't revealed her family ties to them. She hasn't told anybody that she's a Jew. And then at the end, tacked on at the end of Esther chapter 2, is this little story about Mordecai, who's sitting at the king's gate, and he hears two of the king's officers conspiring to assassinate King Xerxes. And Mordecai hears about that, and he goes and he tells Esther, and Esther tells the king, and she tells the king that Mordecai told her, and the matter is investigated, and it's found to be true, and they're hanged on a stake, and all this is recorded in a daily journal that was kept with the king. Now, if you've read the book of Esther, and I'm sure you have, and you understand the meaning behind this little story that is tacked on at the end of Esther chapter 2, you will know that God is previous, that God knew Haman was coming. God knew how Haman would feel about Mordecai. God knew what Haman would plan for Mordecai. And God sets up this little scenario and makes sure that it's recorded so that there is an exit strategy for Mordecai. There is an exit strategy for Mordecai out of his own demise. And just as an aside, because just so that you understand also the cruelty, I think I think that humankind just learns new ways to be cruel to each other all the time. But the way, when it says here that the soldiers, those 2 officers, were hanged on a stake, you might be picturing hanging, you might be picturing crucifying, I don't know what you're picturing, but what they actually did was they publicly impaled them on a large stake or a tree. I mean, so they publicly impaled them on a large stake or a tree. This is the cruelty that, you know, that was prevalent in kingdoms in biblical times, and is still prevalent in many places on the earth today. But so you can imagine the cruelty that was demonstrated to the king's own Persian officers, but yes, because they were plotting to assassinate him, I get that. But then when Haman's instruction is released against the Jewish people, can you imagine the kind of cruelty they imagined having to live through? So here we go, and here comes Haman. And the king likes Haman, and the king starts to elevate Haman, and eventually he gets precedence, and Mordecai will not kneel before Haman, and we know all of that. And this absolutely infuriates Haman. And here is where the spirit of genocide enters Haman, because Haman doesn't just decide he's just going to kill Mordecai. He looks at Mordecai, he sees, you know, who he is, and he decides, the spirit of genocide enters Haman, and Haman decides that not only is he going to destroy Mordecai, he's going to destroy all the Jews. He's just going to kill them all. So that spirit of genocide that has operated against the Jewish nation is not new. It has been coming, you know, it has been throughout history. And yes, it is a spirit of genocide that has operated against other nations as well. So don't hear what I'm not saying, but what I'm saying is this. Can you imagine, can you believe that Haman, he was not going to be comfortable with simply destroying Mordecai. He was only going to be comfortable with destroying all the Jews. Now, that's a little bit of an overkill, right? The Jews actually contributed to the economy of Persia. They were very involved in Persian life. They'd lived there for years. They were comfortable, as I said, you know, and Haman now comes with this thing that he is now actually, he just wants to kill all the Jews. And that is not a natural reaction. That is an overreaction. And that is what the spirit of genocide brings, an overreaction to something small, where somebody thinks somewhere, you know what, I'm not happy with just wiping this person out. I want to wipe out every single person that is a part of this person's culture or this person's group or this person's race, whatever. It is a spirit of genocide, and whether it takes place all in one go or whether it takes place over years, you know, it's an overreaction to a situation. And Haman's ego was obviously very inflated because of the way Xerxes treated him, and he had this immense overreaction where the enemy stepped up and thought, okay, here's my opportunity to try and destroy the Jewish people. And Haman is going to be the vehicle. Now, bearing in mind also that the reason Haman was even there was because of, I've taught on this before, so you must know the answer to this question, was because of Saul's disobedience. Because of Saul's disobedience. So if you're thinking, who was Saul? Remember Saul? The king of Israel that was humble when he was made king and didn't stay humble after that, and God eventually had to remove him. When he was supposed to destroy the Amalekites, when God said, when Samuel told Saul, you need to destroy the Amalekites. Now, I hear you. Isn't that a spirit of genocide? No, because if you read scripture, it tells you that the evil of the Amalekites had reached its fullness. In other words, God had given the Amalekites opportunity after opportunity after opportunity to know him, to have him as their one true God, and they had continued in the evil way and continued in the evil ways and continued in the evil ways until the evil reached its fullness. when there was no more, the grace period was done, it was expired, it was over. And God was like, okay, enough is enough now. And Saul had been given, it was also a test of Saul's obedience, because Saul had been given this instruction by the Lord to wipe them out. As awful as that sounds, I know that sounds awful. Very terrible times, ancient biblical times. We just do it slightly differently today, and he did not. What did they do? They took the spoil of the Amalekites, the cattle, and because they were wealthy, and that he didn't want to kill the king. Remember, he wanted to humiliate the king, not kill him. He wanted, because that was what they did then. One nation would attack another nation, and the king of the victorious nation would humiliate the king of the fallen nation, which is why most kings and leaders chose to rather die in the battle. They would drag them behind chariots on the ground. They would chain them under their tables and not feed them. They would parade them before their people, beaten and whipped and naked and humiliation. So Saul didn't want to kill the king of the Amalekites. He wanted to humiliate him. Why? Because his own ego was very much saying, hey, look at me, look at what I've done. And he forgot that it was God actually that did all of this. And Samuel's like, that was what led to Saul's downfall. That was Saul's downfall. His disobedience, his prioritizing his own ego and his own self-esteem in front of his people over obedience to God. And then remember, if you read the story, he tried to sacrifice to make up for it. And that's when Samuel says to him, obedience is better than sacrifice. Remember, God asks us to sacrifice. He absolutely does. But he doesn't appreciate it, and this is a little side note, when we sacrifice in order to manipulate our way out of disobedience. So if God has told you something or asked you to do something or called you to something, and you know by this time, because it's been a constant conversation, that you are walking in disobedience because you haven't stepped into that, and then you come and you say to the Lord, I'm going to offer you a sacrifice of praise, I'm going to offer you a sacrifice of fasting. If you are fasting or praising to manipulate God, to overlook your disobedience, that's not going to work. Because obedience in that instance is better than sacrifice. It's not that if you're obedient, God never calls you to sacrifice, because obedience in itself is a sacrifice. But God can't be manipulated. He can't be manipulated. So Saul didn't do what he was supposed to do. And according to historians, they think that probably there was someone who escaped or someone who got away, or somehow the seed of the Amalekites was not wiped out. And it reared its ugly head again in Haman. And Haman was there to try and do what the Amalekites had never managed to do before, and wipe out the Jewish people. So the Jews in Esther's time paid the price for the consequences of Saul's disobedience. Think about that for a moment. The Jews in Esther's time paid the consequences for the price of Saul's disobedience. History repeats itself, yes. So the reason why Purim is called Purim is because the way that Haman decided when he was going to begin this wholesale slaughter was they threw lots, which were called pur, P-U-R. They threw lots. And so from that came the name Purim. And they threw lots. It says in Esther chapter 3, verse 7, in the first month, the month of Nisan, the first month in the 12th year of Xerxes. So remember, Esther was crowned. So I want you to remember this. Esther was crowned in the 7th year of his reign. Okay? This is now the 12th year of his reign. So that is what? 5 years later. 5. Grace. Amongst other things, but grace. So Esther is crowned in the 7th year of Xerxes' reign. God is like, I'm bringing a cycle to completion. Nobody would have understood what that cycle was. 5 years later, in the 12th year of his reign, here comes Haman, and he starts to determine when he can destroy the Jews. Because we think everything happened right after each other. You know, Esther was crowned, and the next day Haman went to Xerxes, and because that's how we read it. We don't always read the timing. So Esther had been King Xerxes' queen for 5 years already, okay? And if you think for one moment that that 5 years would have been easy, don't. Yes, she would have been surrounded by luxury. Yes, it tells us that Xerxes loved her more than all the others, as far as he possibly was capable of that. But he was a warmongering, volatile, probably alcoholic. And it's not that he loved her more than all the others and he was like, okay, you are going to be the only one for me. He still had a harem of hundreds, if not thousands of women. And she wouldn't have been his first choice every day. That I can assure you. So they cast lots every day and every month until the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. So for 12 months, for a full year, Haman casts lots every day to determine the day of the Jews' demise, okay? And then he goes to Xerxes, and he says to Xerxes, okay, so here there's Jewish people, and they have a few different things than we have, and they live here, and so I would like a decree written for their destruction. But you see, I don't think Xerxes heard any of this, because what did I say to you? Xerxes was a warmonger. He was a warmonger. His father, his predecessors in terms of military had built this enormous kingdom. Persia, the kingdom of Persia stretched from India to Ethiopia. So Africa's in there, people. Africa's playing a part in the Persian kingdom. The Persian kingdom stretched from India to Ethiopia. It was an enormous kingdom. But Xerxes wanted to also be someone who extended the kingdom and conquered more lands. So he was constantly going to war. But war costs. And so Xerxes, if you study the history of Persia, Xerxes, by this point in time, he was running out of money. Remember, in between Vashti and Esther, that 6-year period in between Vashti and Esther, he had gone to war against Greece and he had lost. And it cost more to lose a war than it cost to win a war, okay? And so he had lost. So he was running out of money. He was a warmonger. He wanted to go to war. He wanted to take over other nations. He wanted to do all the things, okay? But he was running out of money. Money was in short supply. So Haman comes to him and says to him, listen, I just want to wipe out this nation of people. But he says to Xerxes, because Haman knows Xerxes' weak point, he says to Xerxes, I will hand over 330 tons of silver to the officials in charge of the king's affairs to deposit in the royal treasury. And that is the selling point for Xerxes. I will hand over 330 tons of silver. Money is not only an issue in nations today. In things like this, in events like this, you follow the money, people. Follow the money. When one nation of people sells out another nation of people, they can say all the things about how good and pure their motives are that they want to. Follow the money. It is going to be somewhere there, back in is a monetary value attached to what is happening. It is because people are greedy. And King Xerxes didn't even ask who the Jewish people were, what part they played in his kingdom. All he heard was 330 tons of silver. Wow, who can I take out with all of that? And that was it. The Jewish people's destruction came upon them. the enemy uses the same things time and time again as a weapon against God's people, us, the Jewish people, us. He uses the same things time and time again as a weapon against God's people. He is not creative. Only God is a creator. He is not a creator, the enemy. And so he doesn't have a whole lot of brand new tricks up his sleeve. He uses the same tricks. He just dresses them up in different language. He just puts them, puts a different face on them. He uses the same things. And you can read the things that happened in the Old Testament. You can read about the demise of the Persian Empire, the demise of the Greek Empire, the demise of the Roman Empire, and you can see the same pattern in nations today. And at the end of the day, it comes down to silver and gold. Not even to paper money, because paper money is useless in most places of the world, because very few nations have the gold to back up their paper money. But it comes down to resources, silver, gold, minerals. It comes down to that. Don't be blinded by people's spoken agendas, by their motives that might sound good and pure. It's always going to be about the money. So letters go out. It says here, Esther chapter 3, verse 13, letters were sent by courier to all the royal provinces to destroy, kill, and exterminate all Jews from young to old, including small children and women, on a specific day, the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar, and to seize their goods as plunder. Done. That's it. Imagine getting such a letter. Imagine getting such a letter. Mordecai learns about it. He tears his clothes, his sackcloth and ashes. He goes through the city lamenting and crying bitterly. In every province there's a great mourning among the Jews, fasting, weeping, wailing. Many lay down, sackcloth and ashes. And Esther hears about this, and she tries to get Mordecai to put clothes on and instead of sackcloth, and he won't. And then she summons an official because she can't actually go and speak to him. So she is, even though she's queen over Shushan, she's secluded in women's quarters, and she would have no access to outside political information apart from Hatak, who is her, the person who looks after her. Apart from that, she's secluded in women's quarters. She would have no outside access to political information. I want you to understand, she's lived this life for 5 years. Eventually, she manages to get messages from and to Mordecai. Mordecai tells her what is happening, and he says to her, he instructs her to approach the king, intercede with him, and implore his favor on behalf of her people, because Mordecai suddenly realizes, hang on, there is a key here, and that key is Esther. And Esther messages him back, and she's like, you can't go, I can't just approach the king. If I just approach the king without him calling me, I can be put to death. That's the rule in the court. And I haven't been summoned to the king for the past 30 days. 5 years into their marriage, she hasn't seen the king for a month. This one that he loved above all the others. But he can go for a month without seeing her. And then Mordecai says this to Esther. And I'm getting excited and knocking my... So this is Mordecai's response. Can you imagine how frustrating that must have been? That Mordecai couldn't actually have a conversation with Esther face to face. He had to give Hatak a message to take to Esther. Esther had to take the message from Hatak and give a message to Hatak to take back to Mordecai. Can you imagine the frustration? Your nation is about to be wiped out, and you are restricted to sending messages backwards and forwards because you cannot actually have a face-to-face conversation, because even though you are the queen of Shushan, you are kept secluded in the royal court and you cannot talk to anybody outside. And it's been like this for 5 years. Longer, if you count the year that she spent getting ready. 6 years. And this is what Mordecai says to her. Don't suppose that merely because you happen to be in the royal palace, you will escape any more than the other Jews. For if you fail to speak up now, relief and deliverance will come to the Jews from a different direction. Such is Mordecai's faith. He's like, God is going to deliver us anyway. But if you don't allow him to use you as an instrument of deliverance, you and your father's family will perish. Who knows whether you didn't come into your royal position precisely for such a time as this. This is Mordecai's message back to Esther. Now, I would imagine that most of you would think, wow, that's quite harsh, eh? Because what Mordecai is asking her to do is to risk her life. She is risking her life for her people. Her physical life, because she's already her life. She's risking her physical life for her people. This is what Mordecai is asking her to do. And he says to her, God is going to deliver us one way or the other. That I know. But if you don't step up as the tool of deliverance, which is, I'm realizing that's why you've been put there, you and your father's family are going to perish. And you know, sometimes we have been called to something. God has called us to do something. God has called us into something. God has given us a mandate, an assignment. God has, and we have people around us, because I'm trusting we are all part of a prophetic community. We have people around us who can see the call, who understand the call, who know the assignment, and they watch while we dither and faff and I don't know, I don't think so, I don't think it's me, I don't think I can do this, I don't think God would have called me, why what, why this, why that, and eventually God calls someone to step up and stand in front of you and say, listen, this is what you're called to. And if you're not going to walk in obedience, there will be consequences, because that is the way it is. But this is the call on your life. Are you going to step up or not? And then let's hear how Esther responded, and let's think back to events in our lives and see whether this is how we would have responded. Esther responds and she says, assemble all the Jews, fast for me, neither eating nor drinking for 3 days, night and day. I and the girls attending me will fast the same way. Then I will go into the king, which is against the law, and if I perish, I perish. Mordecai didn't go back and say, Esther didn't go back and say to Mordecai, you're so mean to me. You're so horrible. How can you say that? How can you say that me and my father's family will die, but the Jews will still be delivered? How can you say that, that I must just risk my life for this thing that we don't even know is going to work? How can you say that? How can you say that maybe God put me in this position so that I get to risk my life for the Jewish people? I didn't choose this. Because she didn't. She didn't choose that. That wasn't like, she wasn't born saying, this is what I'm going to give my life to. She didn't choose that. She could have gotten all offended. She could have gotten all upset. She could have gone into a flat spin. She could have gone straight, which she wouldn't have gone straight to King Xerxes because she couldn't, but she could have said to Hatak, get Xerxes to take my uncle out. I've had enough of him. And when people confront us, when people stand in front of us and say to us, I love you, I do, but God has called you to this, and you are just, I don't know, you're allowing insecurity to get in the way, you're allowing low self-esteem to get in the way, you're allowing a feeling of worthlessness to get in the way, you're allowing a low self-value to get in the way, you're allowing, you're allowing the enemy effectively, because that's where those things come from, or your unhealed wounds, you're allowing them to get in the way of what God has called you to. This is destiny time. This is destiny time. You need to step up. What's wrong with you? Maybe you were born for such a time as this. Do we respond? Do we put our big girl panties on? And do we respond and say, you know what? I don't feel ready. I don't know why God chose me. I feel like there's so many people who could have done this better than me. But okay, I'm going to step up. And if I perish, I perish. Or do we go to our other friends who are quite happy for us to remain in our comfort zone and say to them, oh my word, you know, those people were so rude. They were so mean. They just want me to do these things that, that I'm just not ready and I might never be ready. They weren't very loving. That person, she wasn't very loving. If you have a destiny, and we all do have a destiny, God is going to put a Mordecai in your life. And that Mordecai, it could be your spouse, if you have the privilege of being married to somebody like that, which I do. It could be your bestie, if you have the privilege of having a bestie like that, which I do. It could be, I'm not blessed. It could be anybody in your life. But God is going to put a Mordecai in your life. And that Mordecai is going to constantly provoke you and challenge you to step into that destiny. And they are probably a person who you feel a bit uncomfortable with. It's probably a person who you feel a little bit like they don't maybe quite, understand the things you struggle with. But that person is there to be the catalyst for you to step into what God is calling you to. Because we all need a catalyst. We all need a catalyst. We all have moments of saying, I don't know. Believe you me. Believe you me. Colleen can tell you stories, those of you who know Colleen, about the times when I've said to her, I don't think. And she's come back, yes, you can. This is what you're called to. Come on, pull yourself together. Put your big girl panties on. Step up now. She doesn't go, oh, it's okay. If you are called to be an Esther, and we all have Esther 4:14 moments, and we all have Esther 4:14 situations that we're called to, and it might not be national, but it might be somewhere wherever you are situated within your sphere of influence, then I can guarantee you there is somebody in your life who is a Mordecai. And that Mordecai is the one who is pushing you into that space. And I've told the story before because I have been blessed to have more than one Mordecai, and you will also have more than one Mordecai. I've told you the story before, but Stu, who's always faithfully on these lives, he was the one as well. He was a Mordecai. He was a Mordecai for me, because when God called me to start recording and putting my recordings online, and before I had the courage to go live, Stu was the one who did the recordings for me, who said to me, Sally, you can do this. You're a natural. You were born for this. You're amazing. He was the one who constantly bolstered my confidence, gave me the courage, showed me the way to do things, how it should be done. All of those things. Stu was the one. Stu was another Mordecai in my life. Stu was a queen maker. And he played an enormous role in positioning me for where I am today. And there have been others, but there will always be a Mordecai to your Esther. Pay attention to those people who push you outside of your comfort zone. Pay attention to those people who are the ones who say to you, there's more than this. God is more than this for you. Come on, step up. Come on, step up. Come on, step up. And it's because I have had people in my life who have said to me, come on, Sally, step up, come on, who haven't let me just rest on my laurels or go, oh, no, okay, I think I'm done. Oh, that is one of the reasons why I get to do that for you, for many of you, where I get to say, come on, wake up now, come on, step up now, come on, come on, come on. Pay attention to the people who sometimes say the words you don't want to hear. But down deep inside of you, in your spirit, you know that they're right. Pay attention to those people. Look out for your Mordecai, so that you can be the Esther you're called to be, so that you can step into that 4:14 moment, so that you can stand boldly before the throne of God and say, if I perish, but I will do what you have called me to do. And remember, we looked into the meaning of that word perish before. It doesn't just mean physically die. It means to wander away, to be lost, which carries the connotation of, even if Esther hadn't physically died, she would have wandered away from her destiny. She would have been lost. She would have lost her opportunity to step into everything God had called her to do. And we all know what happens. God comes through. And Esther has this banquet. So Haman tries to, I'm going to have to move fast through the next bit. Haman tries to hang Mordecai. The king is reminded of what Mordecai did. The king, Haman has to actually honor Mordecai instead of hanging him. Haman has to honor Mordecai instead of hanging him. Understand that you keep walking in obedience. Mordecai walked in obedience. Mordecai could have let those king's officers assassinate King Xerxes. That he wasn't Persian. They lived in Persia. They were in exile effectively. He could have thought, who cares whether the king dies? But he didn't. He did what was right. He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, and he warned the king. Now, this is the favor being repaid. The favor is being repaid. And instead of Mordecai being slain, he is treated with enormous favor. His enemy is forced to give him favor. Mordecai's enemy is forced to give him favor. And for some of you, that is happening in your life. It is going to happen in your life, where the enemy will be forced to give you favor because you have continued to walk in righteousness and holiness and purity no matter what. And the enemy is going to be forced to turn around and give you favor. That's a prophecy there. That's a prophecy right there. And then Esther has a banquet. What's amazing is, in many of our Bibles, it talks in the book of Esther, it speaks about 2 banquets. In this complete Jewish study Bible, it only talks about 1 banquet. I found that quite interesting. And Esther then tells the king about what Haman's plan. And the king gets so angry that he walks outside, and Haman falls at Esther's feet. But the thing is this, that no man was allowed to be alone with the queen apart from the king. No man was allowed to be alone with the queen apart from the king. So Haman should have run outside with the king. He should have, but he was in such a panicked state that when the king stormed outside, Haman fell at Esther's feet, and the king comes back and he's like, "What? Are you even going to assault my wife?" And Haman is dealt with. Haman is dealt with, and the consequences of Saul's original disobedience are sorted out. The consequences of Saul's original disobedience are sorted out. And then the king has to issue another edict, because he cannot reverse. In Persia, the law was that a king could not reverse an edict that he had sent out. So he issued another edict to say that the Jews could defend themselves against anybody who rose up against them. And I want you to notice that the Jews did. They defended themselves, and many of the Persians chose not to even enter into the fight. They just left them alone. And some of the Persians actually converted to Judaism because of the favor on the Jewish people. I'm sorry, lesson for the church here? Is anybody hearing the lesson for the church here? The Jews defended themselves. So the Persians didn't even bother to rise up against them, many of them. And some of the Persians actually converted to Judaism. They became Jews because of the favor, God's favor on the Jewish people. But you will notice when you read about the Jews defending themselves that they didn't take any of the spoil. They didn't take any of the spoil. They rose up against their enemies, such as the ones that rose up against them. And they defended themselves against the original edict, but they didn't take any of the spoil. And thus, the original curse of the Amalekites was broken. Because what did Saul do? He took the spoil. Was he supposed to? No. Here we are, how much later? And the Jewish people defend themselves. The Amalekite curse has finally been dealt with, but they don't take any of the spoil. Because they are bringing to an end. The consequences of Saul's disobedience ended there. So when people say over Purim that the curse has been reversed, it's not just the curse of Haman, it actually goes way further back than that. And that's what happens when we step up as Esthers. When we step up as Esthers, daughter of God, son of God, when we step up as Esthers, we get to reverse the curse, and not just the immediate curse, but the consequence of disobedience in our generational line, in our people group, in our nation. We get to step up as the one righteous person and walk in obedience with God and reverse the curse. Come on. God is calling each and every one of us at this time to step up as a Mordecai, to step up as an Esther, not just to break today's curse, but to break centuries ago's curse. Centuries ago's curse. Not just for individuals, but for people groups, for nations, for nations. Come on, wake up. Rise up, step up. Let us be who God has called us to be. Let us step into the destiny He's called us to step into. Have a wonderful Friday. Have a fabulous Purim. I love you all. I bless you all. And I will see you on Monday morning for Start Your Week with Sally. Bless you.